With the varying weather that we've got here in the UK, it's becoming quite difficult to decide what is the right plant, right place, especially as we are getting really wet winters and really dry summers. So that is what I'm going to be discussing in this video today. Hello, I'm Rosie Hardy. This is Rosie Hardy Gardening. Now, it can be quite a daunting task to realise that some of the plant material you have got in your gardens now are not fit for purpose. By that I mean you will be finding, because everybody said, you know, about 5 years ago, oh, we're going to get much warmer, the warming climate. Therefore, we're going to have to start planting Mediterranean plants. And so a lot of people did. They started putting in grey-leafed material. They started putting in a lot of lavenders and rosemaries and all of these things that you'd expect to see in the Mediterranean. Forgetting, though, that we have extremely wet winters. Now, Mediterranean plants will manage cold, so they're quite happy for it to go down to -10, -15, maybe even lower than that. But the majority of the Mediterranean countries that people have been thinking about, like Greece or Turkey or any of those types of places, those areas do not have the rainfall that we have here on the island of Great Britain. The UK is a maritime island. It has its own natural weather patterns, which are ridiculously different in different parts of the country. You can have it being really bright and sunny up in Scotland and soaking wet and cold down in England. And conversely, it can be the other way around. And our patterns seem to have changed, and when we are getting the rain has changed. So we are getting very wet from November, December, January, February, March, even into the April showers. What plants like that? Well, definitely not those grey leaf plants, because they find that far too wet and soggy for them. So we're going to have to think about different things. And then over the last 2 or 3 years, we've suddenly been getting these really, really hot, dry summers. July and August have become so hot and dry, it's making the area parched, and even plant material that's got low-level roots. So I'm not talking about plant material that's got its roots right the way down, but plant material that has just got it on the surface are finding it really difficult to survive through those conditions. And it's almost getting to the point where we may have to be thinking about having beautiful spring into early summer gardens, and then thinking about using things that are architectural to give us that bit of interest and everything else through the summer. And then once we get the rain again, usually about September time into October and November, we get a long extended lot of flowering. We need to really consider what we are putting into the gardens when we are looking at our springtime. So not only are we looking at the wonderful bulbs, there are loads of bulbs that you can put in, and they will all look fantastic and they will all do really well. Snowdrops love it quite wet. The daffodils are quite happy. You know, there are other things, the muscari, the native bluebells do well. And then what else have you got that you can encourage to grow? Well, there are things like the primroses and different types of primulas that you can grow. There are the summer deciduous plants, and those I think are going to be key for a lot of people's gardens. So by summer deciduous, I mean they go dormant in the summer months. So they are herbaceous perennials. They are just creating their herbaceousness at a different time. That sounds really weird. Most people think of a herbaceous border coming up into leaf May, June, flowering its hearts off through June, July, August, September, and then through the winter they've died back down again. You may see a little bit of foliage there, and that's fine. Those are the plants that I think are going to suffer more through the summer periods. We have the converse lot of plants, which the ones which are summer deciduous, so they're herbaceous, but they are growing through the winter months, flowering in the spring to early well, late spring, maybe early summer just, and then they die back down just as the heat comes in, just as the rain stops. And those are the things that I think a lot of people are going to have to learn to put more of in their garden, and learn not to dig them up in the summer months. So what am I talking about? I am talking about things like Corydalis, for instance. So Corydalis elata is brilliant. Its foliage has been making a mat for right the way through from December, January, February, March. We're into April now. It's going to start flowering. It will flower April, May, maybe into June. Then it dies back down again. This is a woodlander. It loves damp soil, so it's really happy in the damp conditions. And then as it's coming into flower, it's quite happy for it to be sunny, and then it doesn't need much more rain on it or water until it dies back down again, and then it is perfectly fine. You have a lot of things like the Anemone blandas like this. Again, they love it because they are corms, so therefore they absorb all of the water through the winter. They come up into leaf now, they flower their hearts off, die back down. As the ground gets dry, so the corms dry up. They're happy. That's what they want to do. So it is understanding how these plants work and what you need to do. So those are the ones which are summer deciduous, and they're going to die back down, be perfectly happy. You've got your other forms, and probably one of the things that I'm trying to say here is that we've got to look at species, and especially wherever you are, in whichever country you are, you need to look at the species that are best for your ground, for your area. I can't give you a blanket full name and list of what there is, because if you're in the southern parts of the United States, it's completely different. I'm talking generally here about what I'm seeing happening here in the UK. And that is what I'm trying to say. You need to look at what is growing well, what is coping with the different types of weather that you are getting, and then find varieties within that. Look at the species first. Species are really, really good at coping with all sorts of things. So Geum rivale, that is our native geum. You can always tell it because it has the drop head flowers on it like this. This one happens to be a named form. This is Tales of Hex, has much bigger, beautiful flowers, really strong grower, loves the water and wet in the spring, grows really well, and then as soon as it gets hot, it'll put up lovely decorative seed heads, and then it will just go a little bit dormant. If it gets wet again, it will come back and give you a second flowering. So that is a really useful one also. Cirsium, Cirsium rivulare, of the river. So these are things which have got long roots, their tap roots get down. That's another thing to think about. What is the root structure like of the plants that you're putting in? This is just putting on its beautiful thistle head, and it's going to be really tall. But this loves the damp weather through the winter months and then coming up. And then it will do perfectly well until it gets to about June, July, and then it may find it a little bit dry. It will die back down. You can give it a cut back. Once it gets wet again, it will then grow back up again. So this is something else to look and think about. What plant material will do really well until it gets warm? You can give it a haircut. It can sit there and be just ticking along through the hotter months. And then as soon as it gets rain again, it's back up into flower. This is the consideration that we've really got to think about with all of this material. If you live in the UK and any of these plants are of interest to you, then please do have a look at my online plant shop. Our search feature makes it easy to find the exact plant for any tricky garden spot you wish to fill. Click the link in the description or search for hardysplants.co.uk. Now back to the video. There are lots of perennials that will grow really well in the early spring, flower really nicely, give them a haircut and they flower again. So those are the sorts of plants that you need to be thinking about using. I've mentioned the Cirsium will do that. Astrantia are another one. They are great, and again, they like it quite moist. If it gets dry in the summer, they tend to have a little rest, and then again, once it gets warmer later on, they will come back up. So you have to to think about these plants that you are considering and putting in. As I said, species are good. And of the species that I've got here, I've already mentioned one or two there. There are some later flowering species, such as Cephalaria alpina and Succisa pratensis, which are both quite happy. Now, Cephalaria alpina, this brings me on to another lot of plant material that will cope. The alpine plants will cope really well. Just choose them carefully though. Not all alpines are this height. This one, Cephalaria alpina, gets up to probably 5 feet, 1 meter 20, 1 meter 50 with its flower. But because it has less foliage at the bottom, it doesn't require as much summer moisture. It also puts its roots down quite a long way. It comes from a moister area in the alpine regions, which then dry out and then get wet later on. So they are used to the extremes and the heat and everything else. So consider where the plants come from, what their natural growth habit is. That will help you consider. And I am thinking that a lot of stuff which has got much deeper root is going to be better, because there will be moisture lower down, so they will be able to keep on going. But I do think we've got to think about this fact and plant for July and August and think, do you know what? We're not going to have as much flower then. If we try and push these plants and we keep on trying to water them, that is not going to do them any good. And we do here at Hardy's suggest to people, once you get to a really hot summer, give your herbaceous perennials a chance by giving them a cut back and letting them have a rest, because that is what they need. They just need that rest. Don't keep on trying to water them. It's a waste of water. Just give them a haircut, allow them to just die back, and then once we get natural rain again, they will sprout back up and give you a wonderful colour, which means we're going to have fabulous late August, Septembers, Octobers, maybe into November, beautiful plant material. Something like this, the Succisa pratensis, native to the UK, it is fabulous. It loves a damp area, flowers its heart off, and it will have a double flowering as well. The species are tough. They are able to cope with the conditions. So once you've found the species that are doing really well in your neighbourhood, or speak to garden clubs, you know, that's a very good source of getting local information. Find your local gardening club. These gardening clubs will not keep going unless you go out there and actively go there, help them. You know, they will tell you what they are having success with. It's brilliant. Go and look at open gardens, see what they're having success with. Talk to people. Don't just wander around and go, I like that plant. Speak to the gardener who's looking after it and say, why is that successful? What have you been doing to make it look so good at this time of the year? And you may find that they've changed their regimes from what they used to do. And this is another thing that I would like to talk about, because it is getting so wet in November, December, January, February, March. If you have gone and mulched in October, you've almost put a layer where the water cannot get through. So please think about mulching at a different time, or just putting a little bit of winter mulch on, because the idea behind putting mulch on earlier in the year or over the winter months is that it gets a time for the worms to work on it and that sort of thing. But I am considering now, thinking of telling people, really wait until the soil is saturated now. Stuff is starting to grow up. You can see where the plants are, and mulch at this time of the year to keep all that moisture into the beds. But do not, while the plant material is coming up, cover that plant material and then mulch around. That will be much, much better, and your borders will stay much moister for a lot longer right the way through. And the other thing to do is do not do weeding with forks and spades through the summer months. Every time you cut into the topsoil and you open up a crack, you let out a lot of moisture. So weeding, I'm going to say to you, weed right the way through the spring. Once you get to about May, stop pulling out weeds and stop digging up weeds. If you see them, cut them down. Do not disturb the soil. Do not break that surface of the soil, because that is keeping the moisture into your beds. That's just a little thing. My mother used to do that in Yorkshire, and she'd been doing that for the last 10-15 years. She had very, very light sandy soil, and she knew perfectly well if she went and dug or tried to pull out big weeds, she would get a really dry patch where she had done that. So instead, she just used to cut it off the top, not breaking the soil. And that way, you know, your plants survive far, far better. All right. So the last couple of things that I wanted to talk about are things that are going to flower slightly later or things that are going to be taller. Baptisia are great. Again, they love a damper area, come up, look great. You can leave the seed heads there. This is one of those plants which will flower and look fantastic in June. Then in July, it's starting to go over. Leave it there as the architectural piece, because the seed heads look fantastic. Seed heads of this with grasses, this is what you're going to have to be thinking about, because they're bluey black, and against the grasses they look fantastic. And the grasses will be up and doing their thing, and they are loving the conditions that are there. Flowers which come out later, things like Hylotelephium, sedums, they will love it because they're great. They're growing away now, they're coming on. They love dry conditions. They will just sit there looking really good, beautiful foliage, and then start to come up into flower. So late season plants, that's another lot of plant material that you can think about. Really good. Other than that, maybe think about species that self-seed around. It's things like Erigeron karvinskianus, for instance. This is a fantastic Spanish daisy to you and me. I love it. Some people think it's an absolute nightmare. Some people can't get it to grow in their garden. You know, Verbena bonariensis, another one. All of these self-seeders, verbascums, they are great. You will get them popping up left, right and centre, giving you some. If you don't want them to seed around, it's easy. Cut off the seed heads, or just get the seeds out as and when they come through. But those are something that people are going to have to learn to live with. The more naturalistic we are, the more we will find that our gardens will look fantastic, because you can go out into the landscape during the times when it is dry and it is baked, it still looks beautiful. There will be little low plants that are looking great. There will be taller seed heads looking good. The grasses will be giving you structure. And and what I'm trying to say here is the things that need your watering, which are finding it more difficult and get under more stress than the herbaceous, are your shrubs and trees. Save your water for the shrubs and trees, because the herbaceous are very good at coming back once the actual weather changes. Shrubs and trees get under real stress, and it's those that are going to need your help more than these. Just change what you put in, have that idea of the more naturalistic, and have the idea you don't do any gardening in July and August. Just have a wonderful time and enjoy what you've created. And I think that's the way that we need to go ahead. Now, some people will not agree with me on this, and maybe you've got your own well and you're able to water quite freely, but I do think we are going to run into that situation. We have to be collecting water, we have to be using it wisely, and for me personally, trees and shrubs will need more water than the herbaceous stuff. And just remember, you want to be looking for species, you want to be looking for things that are alpine, but check where they're coming from. More late season plants, more summer deciduous plants, and more plants that flower early, you cut them and they flower again later. That's where we need to be heading with these wet winters and dry summers. Thank you very much for watching, and please do subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch another video of mine, YouTube thinks this one is perfect for you.